No war, no invasion, no tanks. Yet within just a few years, America reshaped the future of Europe. Not through force, but through finance. And what began in 1947 may still shape the world you live in today. Europe was in ruins. Over 50 million people were dead. Cities reduced to ash. Industrial output had collapsed. Millions faced hunger as the harsh winter approached. And hovering over the continent were two rising superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both understood the same truth. Whoever rebuilt Europe would influence the balance of global power for decades. But what happened next was more than aid. Many historians now describe it as one of the most strategic economic moves ever made. And if you understand it, you understand why the global economy still runs the way it does. Picture the world in 1945. Nearly every major economy was shattered, except one. American factories were untouched, its infrastructure intact, its production surging. By 1950, the United States accounted for nearly half of the world's industrial output. Europe, meanwhile, needed everything: food, fuel, machinery, capital. At the same time, communist parties were gaining influence across Western Europe, France, Italy, Greece. For American policymakers, the risk was not only ideological, it was strategic. A collapsing Europe could destabilize global trade, weaken security alliances, and close off critical markets. Stability wasn't just humanitarian, it was in America's national interest. June 5th, 1947, Harvard University. Secretary of State George Marshall stepped to the podium and proposed something unprecedented. The United States would finance Europe's recovery, not against any nation, he said, but against hunger, poverty, and chaos. Congress approved roughly $13 billion in aid, the largest economic assistance program the world had ever seen. Across Europe, relief turned into optimism. Factories reopened, infrastructure returned, trade restarted. To many, it looked like extraordinary generosity, and in many ways, it was. But economic assistance rarely comes without structure. Marshall Plan funds were designed to accelerate recovery, but also to integrate economies, recipient countries to coordinate trade, reduce barriers, and modernize industry. Much of the aid was spent on importing American goods: wheat, steel, machinery, equipment, which meant something fascinating happened. Dollars flowed into Europe and then circulated back into the United States through exports. Recovery and commerce reinforced each other. Europe rebuilt faster. American industry expanded. Global trade surged. Critics later argued this didn't just rebuild economies, it helped anchor a U.S.-centered economic order. Supporters countered that the alternative might have been prolonged depression. Both can be true. Before the war, international trade often relied on gold or national currencies. After the war, the dollar became increasingly central, supported by America's enormous gold reserves and industrial strength. Marshall aid operated largely in dollars. So did many loans and many trade agreements. Gradually, the dollar evolved into the backbone of global finance. Not imposed overnight, but adopted because it offered liquidity, stability, and scale when the world needed it most. Once systems form around a currency, they tend to persist. Switching becomes extraordinarily costly. Here's where history takes a dramatic turn. The Soviet Union was invited to participate in the Marshall Plan, but Stalin declined, concerned that economic integration with the West would limit Soviet autonomy. Eastern Bloc nations followed his lead, and soon an invisible line hardened across Europe. West aligned economically with the United States. East organized around Soviet influence. The Cold War wasn't shaped by military power alone. Economic systems helped draw the map. Out of this era emerged institutions, alliances, and financial networks that still define global commerce. NATO strengthened security ties. Trade partnerships multiplied. Dollar-denominated markets expanded. To supporters, this framework produced decades of growth and relative stability across much of the Western world. To critics, it concentrated extraordinary financial influence in one country. Again, perspective matters. But the system endured. More than 70 years later, the dollar remains the world's primary reserve currency. Most global trade touches it. Many central banks hold it. Major commodities are priced in it. When U.S. interest rates shift, capital moves worldwide. When the American economy slows, ripple effects follow. This isn't evidence of conspiracy. It's the long shadow of structural power. And structures, once built, are remarkably difficult to replace. So how should we understand the Marshall Plan? Was it humanitarian? Strategic? Both? Because Europe did recover, dramatically. Living standards rose. Democracies stabilized. War-torn societies rebuilt. Yet the program also accelerated an economic architecture that elevated American influence. Perhaps the real lesson is this: major policies rarely serve only one purpose. They solve crises, while quietly shaping the future. Today, when nations face financial emergencies, they often turn to global institutions for support. Loans frequently come with conditions: reforms, market adjustments, fiscal restructuring. Supporters argue these measures promote long-term stability. Critics argue they can create lasting dependency. The debate is ongoing. But the blueprint, cooperation tied to economic alignment, feels familiar. History suggests that the most durable influence isn't always exercised through armies. Sometimes it's exercised through systems, through trade networks, currencies, standards, institutions. Empires once controlled territory. Modern powers often help design the rules. And when the world runs on those rules, influence becomes almost invisible. What this means for you. So when you hear about aid packages, financial rescues, or economic partnerships, it's worth asking, who benefits immediately? Who benefits long term? And how does it reshape the system? Because power rarely disappears. It evolves from crowns to contracts, from borders to balance sheets. The Marshall Plan wasn't just a recovery program. It was a turning point in how global power could be built, not through conquest, but through connection. And once you see that, you start to notice the pattern everywhere. Understanding this moment isn't about choosing sides. It's about seeing how the modern world took shape, because the forces that built yesterday's economy are often the ones steering tomorrow's. And the biggest shifts in history, they don't always arrive with explosions. Sometimes they arrive as assistance,